Begin today the Gemara on Daf Mem Daled, 3 lines from the top of the Amud. Omar Mar. Gemara brings back what we learned yesterday, a statement from Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, what happens if a woman has 2 Kesubos? One Kesubah says that the husband wrote 200 zuz for her, the regular Kesubah, and then another Kesubah with a later date says 300. So Rav Huna explained, what did the husband mean to do? He didn't mean to nullify the first Kesubah. He meant to give her an option. She can collect with the first Kesubah or she can collect with the second Kesubah. If she's going to collect with the first Kesubah, she has to use the date of the first Kesubah. Then she couldn't use the date of the earlier Kesubah. That could be to her benefit. She can go and use more properties to collect from. But if she's using the later date from the later Kesubah, so then the fact that the husband owes her this money begins from a later date. So that might narrow her options of collecting of less properties that were already sold off before that date. But she gets more. She gets 300. But the point over here is that, again, let's see the words of the Gemara. Amar, what Rav Huna said is, Iboye b'hai gavya, Iboye b'hai gavya. She has a choice. If she wants, she could collect with the first Kesubah, or if she wants, she could collect with the second Kesubah. And we do not say that by the husband writing a second Kesubah, he nullified the first. And this the Gemara asks, Leime pliga de Rav Nachman. Shall we say that what Rav Huna said is arguing what Rav Nachman said? Dama Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman said, Shnei shtaris hayetzin b'zeh achazeh. When you have 2 shtaris that a person is bringing, a malva, let's say, a person that brings 2 shtaris and it says that you owe me money, and it's 2 dates that, or let's say, let's talk about a person that the Gemara is going to speak about, a person that bought a property. He bought a property and he has 2 documents stating that this person sold me this property with 2 different dates. So how do we look at these 2 documents? So Rav Nachman says, Bittul Sheni Yisar Rishain. If the seller wrote the second document, so that means that he really nullified the first document that said that he sold it to him, and it's only the second document that's valid. So what do we see here? That Rav Nachman says that if you have 2 shtaris, that means that the seller meant to nullify the first. So why shouldn't we say the same thing regarding the Kesubos? When the husband writes the second Kesubah, he meant to nullify the first Kesubah. And Rav Huna says, no, you have a choice. You can collect from whichever Kesubah you wish. One Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph. Let's see. The Gemara is going to answer. 1 second. Maybe this is what you mean. Says the Gemara, Lav mi itmir Allah. Didn't we learn regarding what Rav Nachman said, that Omer Rav Papa said, Umayde Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman would agree that we don't say that he nullified the first document, the I'isiv Bei Dikla. If when he writes the second document, he adds something in the second document that was not there in the first, he adds even just 1 palm tree that is adding to this acquisition, L'Taisvis Kasvei. So then he only wrote the second document because he wants to add something, not because he wants to nullify the date of the first document. So Hachanami over here, in the case that Rav Huna was speaking about regarding the 2 Kesubos, Ha'isif Lamidi. He added something in the second Kesubah. The first Kesubah was 200. The second Kesubah was 300. So just by the fact that he added shows that he didn't necessarily nullify the first document. He's now just giving her an option. If whichever one you'll choose to collect from, you'll have the advantage of that shtar, or that Kesubah that you collect from.
Well, she was married, right?
She got married, correct?
She had the Kesubah. She didn't get divorced.
Correct.
So she has 2 Kesubos.
Okay.
Obviously, that he's just adding on because.
Lav Dafka. Why? Lav Dafka.
She can't live without Kesubah.
Okay, but she has 2 though. She has 2 Kesubos. She doesn't need 2. So maybe when he writes her the second one, the first one is bottled. That's why he wrote her the second one. He meant to tell her the first Kesubah you had is bottled. Why not?
And therefore, from that time you weren't married?
It could be you were married, but
that could be good.
He wrote. But the case usually is that both Kesubos were written before marriage. Both of them were written. They got married in Chodesh Nisan. One Kesubah was written in Shvat, and the other one was written in Adar. They were both written before the marriage. Okay, now going back to Rav Nachman's statement itself, the Gemara will focus and explain this better. Gufa Omer Rav Nachman. So what did Rav Nachman say? Shnei shtaris hayetzin b'zeh achazeh. When you have 2 documents that a person shows that he bought this property, one with an earlier date and one with a later date. So Rav Nachman says, Bittul Sheni Yisar Rishain. The second one will nullify the first one. Now Rav Papa, and like we quoted there, Rav Papa said, Maide Rav Nachman will agree, the I'isiv Bei Dikla, if you added in the second document a palm tree, L'Taisvis Kasvei. You wrote the second document just to add this, not to nullify the first document. So the Gemara now explains what Rav Nachman is speaking about. What does he mean that there's 2 documents? Pshite, so now it's obvious. Rishain b'mecher, if the first document this person has is that this person sold me this field. V'sheni b'matana. And then he has a second document with a later date, and here in this document it's written that he gave it to me as a gift. So now in such a case, definitely Rav Nachman, that is, would agree. The only reason you wrote a second shtar is because he's actually giving more power to the receiver of this property. How do you give him more power? By saying that it's a gift and not just a sale. Now it empowers him when it comes to the halacha of bar metzra. The halacha of bar metzra, which is actually learned from the pasuk Vasisa Yoshev Atoiv in last week's parsha, is that if you're selling a property, you have to sell it, or at least give first option to the neighbor, to the bar metzra, the person that lives on the border of your property. Right? But that only applies to when you sell. If you give it as a gift, then I can choose to give a gift to whoever I wish. I don't have to give it to a neighbor. So when this person goes and sells this property, so now the person that bought it might get into problems with a bar metzra that will claim, hey, I have the right to buy it first. But if he gives him a second document, which gives him also as a gift, so now you're giving him more power. If it's a gift, nobody can come and say that they're a neighbor and they want to buy it. So when he wrote the second document, he only wrote it to give him more power, but not to nullify the first document. Gemara says, "V'kol shekain," and most definitely that this would also be true in the reverse. Rishon b'matana, if the first document says that he gave him this property as a gift, v'sheni b'mecher, and the second document says that he sold it to him, da'amrinon. So here we're also going to say that the second document is only to give him more power. Mishom dina de balchayvu de kosav kain, and he wrote this because of the halacha of a balchayv, that by saying that he's selling it to him, it gives the buyer more power. How so? If you give a gift to somebody and then some person that the seller owed money to comes and confiscates this field from the person that you gave it a gift to, so the person that got the gift can't come back to the person that gave him a gift and say, take responsibility for what happened there, reimburse me. I gave you a gift and okay, it didn't work out well and the gift was confiscated from you, too bad. But if you get it as a sale, you bought it from this person, and now someone is going to confiscate it from you and say that the seller owed him money, you can go back to the seller and say, take responsibility. There's a shibud over here on this property. You sold me a property that wasn't free and clear. Take responsibility and reimburse me. So therefore, for sure, when you write a person first a document of a gift and then a document as a sale is giving more power to the buyer, that he can get reimbursed if it gets confiscated. But elo I shneim b'mecher, if both documents are as a sale, or shneim b'matana, or both of them are as a gift. So now, because you wrote the same document with an earlier date and a later date, on this Rav Nachman said bittul sheni sarishain. The second document, it proves that he meant to nullify the first document. Okay, and as the Gemara already clarified before, Rav Papa said, if he did not add anything into the second, didn't add a decal, didn't add anything into the second document. Now the Gemara explains, so now my timer, how exactly do I understand this? When he wrote the second document, what does it mean that he nullifies the first? So there's two opinions, what happens here. Rafram explains what this means is, Eimer, oiduye oidile. What we say over here is, the very fact that the person is showing that there's a second document, what it means is he's being maide that the first document that was written was really false. The reason why the seller had to write a second document is because the first document was a forgery. That's why. That's what it's proving. If you have two documents, why in the world would the seller write a second document after he already wrote that he sold it to him? And he's not adding anything new in the second document. So the fact that this person is showing us the document with a later date, he's admitting that the first document was a forgery. Ravacha Omar. Ravacha says, no, it's not so extreme. It doesn't mean that he has to be admitting that it was a forgery. Eimer, what he's saying is, achule achle l'shibude. He was meichel the shibud, the lien that there is on the properties from the earlier date. Right? There's a difference between the date. When it comes to the date of when you buy the field, it makes a huge difference in what the date is. If there's an earlier date that you bought it, so let's say there was someone that the seller lent money to. So if there was an earlier date that you bought it, so then that person that if you borrowed money from somebody, and so if you sold it on an earlier date, so the person that he owes money to can't collect from this. This is fields that I already sold off before I borrowed money from you. But if he wrote a later date in the shtar, so then the person that he borrowed money from could still collect from this field. Right? So when he writes a later date, he's being meichel that shibud over here. Right? That's what it's saying over here. I mean, but I believe actually the lashon of the Gemara, eichuli achle lishibude, refers to the buyer of the field. The buyer of the field, when he says that I have two documents here, I have an earlier document and a later document, and he's taking out a document with a later date, so then he's being meichel the shibud of the earlier date. If someone comes and collects it from an earlier time, so then he could come with no tinus to the seller that, look, this guy confiscated my field. No, from that earlier date, you never bought it from them. It doesn't belong to you, b'chlal. That's what he's being meichel over here. But he's not saying that the first star was a forgery. It's just a mechila on the lien that there was in the property, that the lien begins from a later date and not from the earlier date. So the Gemara explains, Ma'ai beinayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? So the Gemara brings a few simple differences here. Number one, ikke beinayu, the difference would be Irui Sadi. Do we say that the witnesses on the first star are not kosher witnesses? Right? If you go according to the opinion of Rafram, this person is being maida that the first star was a forgery. So that means that the witnesses on the first star are puzzle. According to the second opinion, which was who over here, Rav Ache, so he never agreed that the first star was a forgery. He was just being meichel the shibud. He said that the shibud that I have on this property starts from an earlier date. I have an earlier date that I bought it from, not a later date. But he never said that the Eidim are a forgery. It was just a mechila. He was meichel the date that let's move it over to a later date. That's just a mechila. Taisus over here actually points out, what does this mean? Rui Sadi. Because you have this individual that's coming and being maida that the first document is a forgery, that's enough to make Eidim puzzle. How could you make Eidim? Taisus uses the expression Taim Gedela. This is a very difficult thing to understand, that just because a person comes and says, oh, the first document was a forgery, how would that be enough to actually deem these Eidim to be puzzle Eidim? Taisus says, no, the Gemara doesn't mean mamish puzzle Eidim. It means for him. If he has other documents with those same Eidim signed on them, for him, these Eidim will be puzzle. If you're being made for yourself, that these Eidim signed on them and that they're puzzle, so then you can't use these Eidim on other documents, but not that it'll be puzzle b'chlal. Another thing the Gemara says, and afgemina between these two opinions, l'shlumi peidi, also to pay back the fruits that you ate between the two dates of the shtar that you have over here. So according to the first opinion, so if you were made that the first shtar was a forgery, so then you have to pay back those fruits that you ate in that time period between the date of the first and the second star, because you're being maided that the date of the first star was a lie, so you didn't buy it from that date. You only bought it from the second date. But according to the opinion of Rav Ache, you're not being maided that the first date was a forgery. No, you really did buy it for the first date. But when you're being maided that there's a second star here, it's a mechila. You're being meichel the shibud, that the lien that there is on this property, that your rights to go and get reimbursed for this field if it would be confiscated from you. That is what you're saying begins from the second date. But as far as the fruits that you ate, there's no reason that you have to reimburse the fruits. The sale really began from the first date. And the same thing is also regarding paying the taxes, paying the property taxes that there is regarding that time period between the date of the first star and the second star. So again, according to the Rafram, if the first star was a forgery, so then the seller is going to be the one to pay the taxes. But if really the sale did take place from the first date, it's just that there was a mechila for the shibud, that only for that there was a mechila, but as far as the property taxes is concerned, you already bought it and you would have to pay it. The buyer, that is, has to pay it. Says the Gemara, "Mai havi Allah the ksubah." Let's go back to the question we asked before regarding the ksubah. What's the halacha with the ksubah? What was the original question we learned yesterday that the Gemara asks in the previous amud regarding the ksubah? From what time period does the shibud, the lien of the ksubah, begin? Does it start from the edison, the first stage of marriage, or does it begin from when the ksubah is actually written? Tashma, the Gemara says, Dam Rav Yudah Mashmul Mishum Rab Elazar Rab Shimon. Mane, Masayim, and Edison. So he paskins like the Gemara before brought in the name of Rab Huna. When it comes to the basic amount that there is in the ksubah, whether the Mane or the Masayim, that is collected from the time of the Edison. So that's the date that we use, that's from when the lien begins. The Taisvis Menan Nisuin, any additional money that the husband wants to add, that begins from Nisuin, which is the time that the ksubah is actually written. The Chachamim say, no, whether it's the ksubah itself, the basic amount, man and masayim, whether it's the additions that the husband wants to add, minan nisuin. It begins from the time of when the Kesubos is written. The halacha is echad zeh ve'echad zeh min hanisuin. That we go by the time of the nisuin itself. That's when we collect the kesubah. That's when the date of the collection goes according to. Zak the Mishnah. So this is a Mishnah which begins discussing a little bit of a new subject related to what we spoke about before, but here we begin talking about the halacha of a Maitzi Shemra. What's the halacha of a Maitzi Shemra? A person that married his wife and then he comes later and says that this wife that I married, she was not a Basulo. Okay, we had that idea before already, but over here, what's the halacha? If it turns out that after Edison, which is the first stage of marriage, she had a relation with somebody else, so then she was an Eishes Ish at that point, and this is what's called a Nara Hamoirasa, a girl that was already after the first stage of marriage. She'll be chayiv skila for having a relation with someone else in that time period. If it turns out that what the husband said is a lie, and he just said a lie, it's a bad rumor about his wife, that's what's called Maitzi Shemra, so then he's going to have to pay her a knas of 100 coins for what he said, and he also has to remain married to her forever. He's not allowed to send her away. So the Mishnah here will explain regarding who this applies. Okay, that's a good question. Zok the Mishnah, Hagiyairis Shenizgaira. Hagiyairis. So she converted and Bita Ima. And her daughter converts together with her. And now, Vizinsa. And we have this case where someone married this girl and she was Mizana after the Edison. Harezu Bechenek. So she will only get a misa of chenek. The chiddush over here is, as I just mentioned, usually by a woman that had a relation with someone else after the Edison, what's the misa she gets? Skila. But over here, because she's a giyaides, she only gets chenek. So as Rashi brings over here, as we'll see in the Gemara, the basis of this whole Mishnah is that when you look in the parsha of Maitzi Shemra, the Torah repeats there a few times that the halacha of Maitzi Shemra only applies to a Yisrael. The Torah uses again and again the words, it says there, Ki asan nevala bi Yisrael. The despicable act was done amongst Yisrael. Yisrael means that we exclude a giyairis. That by a giyairis, this halacha of Maitzi Shemra does not apply, and therefore there's only chenek and not skila. And also the other details that it says there regarding the Maitzi Shemra do not apply as well. Ein law, and also she does not apply, we don't apply to this Giyairis, Loi Pesach Beis Ha'av. Another unique thing regarding Maitzi Shemra is that the place where the skila has to be done is by the entrance of her father's home. So we don't apply that either here. And also V'loi Meyasela, the knas that the husband has to pay of 100 coins doesn't apply here either. However, if the Giyairis is in a different status, and that is Haisa Hayrasa Shaloi B'Kedusha, that when her mother became pregnant with her, she was still not a Yid. Okay, so the pregnancy is without holiness. But when she's born, she's already born as a Yid. So then the specific einish of skila that applies to a Yid will apply to her because she was born as a Yid. But still, nevertheless, ve'ein la loy pesach beis ha'av, the other details which you just mentioned, which is the fact that the skila should be done by the entrance of the father's home, does not apply to her, and ve'loy meyasela. And the fact that the husband would have to pay a knas of 100 coins does not apply either. And the Gemara will learn out from the psukim how we know this. Now, the third category is Haisa Hayrasa Vile Dasa Bigdusha. If this is a Giyairis, but she's born after her mother already converted, even before the pregnancy and before the birth, the mother was already a Yid. So then, Harehi Kabas Yisrael Chol Devara, the child born is a regular Yid, and all the halachas that apply by Maitzi Shemra only for a Yid apply to her as well. Mishnah continues with another halacha, B'chlal, regarding Maitzi Shemra. We're going to get any Yid, Yisraelis. Yesh la'av, if she has a father, ve'en la Pesach beis ha'av. But there is no entrance to the father's home. The father's homeless. Yesh la Pesach beis ha'av, the father has a home where he lived, but ve'en la'av, the father passed away. Hareizu b'skila, she still gets the punishment of skila. In other words, the Mishnah is saying, you may think that this unique chiddush that she gets skila and not chenek maybe applies only when there's a father and a father's home. But if there's no father or there's no father's home, so then there's no skila. So the Mishnah says no, she still gets skila. Leinama Pesach Beis Av Elo mitzvah. Pesach Beis Av is written in the Torah that that's the mitzvah. If there's a father and the father has a home, so then that's where the skila is done. But otherwise, there still is the einish of skila. Says the Gemara Menan Emili. From where do I know this halacha in the Mishnah? And that regarding the middle category, when you have a girl that her pregnancy was before her mother was a Jew, but then she was born after she was a Jew, after she was Nizgaya. From where do I know that over here I say that she does get skila like a Yisraelis? Rish Lakish says the Amakra, because the pasuk says umeisa, and that she dies. Okay, the full pasuk that it says over there is that uskalua anshe ira ba'avanim umeisa. They give her skila, they stone her, and she dies. Why does it add these words umeisa? This word here is an extra word. L'rabbis hayrasa shaloi b'kedusha v'leidasa b'kedusha. It's coming to add something. Even though it says in the pasuk that it's only Yisrael, but nevertheless it's adding umeisa that there's someone else that will also be chayiv the same skila and will die, including this girl that her pregnancy was before her mother became a yid. That's the ribuy of umeisa. Frakta Gemara. So if you have a ribuy over here to add even this girl that was not, her pregnancy did not begin in holiness, nilki. So if so, the malchus should apply over here as well. And that is the halacha of the husband. If he says this bad rumor about his wife and it turns out not to be true, so he gets malchus for this. So the halacha of malchus should apply to this woman as well. And he should also have to pay the knas of the 100 coins, should apply to him as well. What did it say in the Mishnah? That by this category of hayrasa shaloi b'kedusha v'leidasa b'kedusha, we say that the skila applies to her, like every Yisraelis. But the malchus or the knas does not apply in this case. Why not? Answers the Gemara, Amakra umeisa, since we're learning it out from the extra word umeisa, lemisa nisrapsa, only regarding the fact that she gets the same misa like a regular Yisraelis, that's what we have here. But v'loy leknas, but for the knas, for the punishment for the husband, for that we don't have any pasuk to tell me that in this case he gets that knas. Fragt the Gemara, but maybe I should say, ve'eme l'rabbis hayrasa v'leidasa b'kedusha. Why shouldn't I say that maybe when it says here the extra word umeisa, it's coming to say that it's including a girl that was born from a mother that her mother was already Megai before the pregnancy and before the birth. And that's the one that the pasuk is coming to say that she gets the einish of skila. How do you know it's coming to add even someone that the pregnancy was before her mother was a yid? And says the Gemara, it doesn't have to include that. Hahi Yisraelis mal yasehi. If she was born after her mother was already Megayer, and the pregnancy was even after that, so then she's a regular yid. There's no reason to need. We don't need any pasuk to include this. Frak the Gemara. So maybe let's go to the other extent. Maybe this extra word umeisa comes to include even a girl that the pregnancy and the birth was before the mother was Megayer, and she was Megayer herself. And still, we say that she's included in this misa as well. Says the Gemara, but if you're going to say so, im kaim bi Yisrael maya hanile. So the fact that the Torah writes specifically over here that this einish is only for someone that's bi Yisrael, what are we going to learn out from there? If it includes even a giyaitis, so then what's the bi Yisrael coming to teach me? So therefore, we say that the bi Yisrael comes to tell me that we exclude someone that was hayrasa v'leidasa shalei b'kedusha, and the extra word umeisa is coming to add someone which was hayrasa shalei b'kedusha, but leidasa was b'kedusha. Okay, the Gemara now continues with a different halacha. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said, "Amaitzi shemra ala yisaima." A person that's maitzi shemra lets out this bad rumor about his wife that she was mizana after the edison, but she's a yisaima, pater. So he'll be pater if it turns out to be a lie. He's pater to pay the knas to the father. Shenama, because the pasuk says, "V'nosnu la'avia nara," you pay the knas to the father of this nara. Prat lezu she'en la'av. Therefore, that excludes this case when she has no father. Mosef Rav Yossi bar Avin asked. V'teim Rav Yossi bar Zvida asked. This is a pasuk that it says regarding a mefata. Not this case of Meitzi Shamra, but by Mefata, when a person seduced a girl into a relationship. So there it says, V'moin yimoin avia. If her father refuses and he doesn't want that she should get married to this man. So over there, we learned out, what does this mean? L'rabbis yisaima l'knas. That even a yisaima is chayiv, even in a case where a person was Mefata, a yisaima, you also chayiv to pay the knas. It says moin, that would be the father, but it says yimoin, a double lashon, and it refers to her, that she could refuse this marriage, even if the father is not alive at all. So we see that even the Yisaima is chayiv to pay the knas. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So what the Gemara is asking is, just like regarding Mefata, we say that you chayiv to pay the knas even if there's no father, why shouldn't we say the same by Meitzi Shemra? So the way Rashi explains this Gemara is, even though there it's talking about Mefata, here we're talking about Meitzi Shemra, so who says it's the same thing? But what Rashi says is, the Gemara is asking, even though over there the Torah by Mefata also mentions Aviyah, but nevertheless we say, what does Aviyah there mean? It doesn't mean that if there's no father, there's no knas at all. What it means is, if there's no father, then the father's not getting the knas, but she gets the knas. Why shouldn't we say similar regarding Maitzi Shemra? If there's a father, the father gets the knas. If there's no father, then she gets the knas. So the Gemara says, who meisav la, v'hu mefarik la, the one that asked the question, so he himself gave the answer, and he explained, this that we see by a mefata, that even if the father is not here, that she gets the knas, that's only if, when this person had the relationship with this girl, the father was still alive. And then later the father passes away, so she will collect that knas. But, even by a mefata, if when this person had the relationship with this girl, she was already a yisaima, and there's no father already at that point, there's no knas there either. And therefore over here as well, regarding a Maitzi Shemra, there's no knas either if she's a yisaima. This is all whose opinion? This is Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina. Rava disagrees and says, chayiv. Rava says, no, even for a yisaima, meaning she was a yisaima at the time that it was Maitzi Shemra, or at the time of the relationship, chayiv. You are chayiv to pay the knas. And he brings a raya, mimai, from where do I know this? Midetani Ami. Because Ami said that we learn out from this that it says Besulas Yisrael, that you pay a knas for a Besulas Yisrael. So the Torah uses specific, it says there in the pasuk, Hoitzi Shemra al Besulas Yisrael. So why does it have to say Yisrael? V'loi Besulas Gedim. It's coming to exclude the Besula of Gedim. That by Gedim you don't have this payment of knas. So now he explains, if you're going to say that in such a kind of a case when she's a Yisaima, when she doesn't have a father, so by a Yisrael you would be chayiv, you still have to pay the knas, even though there's no father. So therefore you need a pasuk to say that by Gedim you still have to pay knas. But if you're going to say that when it comes to a Yisrael, if she has no father, so then you're going to be potter of paying the knas, because the Torah clearly says that it's only when there's a father. So has to be Yisrael potter. So if by a Yisrael, when there's no father, you potter, would you need a separate pasuk to teach me that for a Gedim there's no knas? A Gert doesn't have a father. When a girl is megayer, so what happens? So there's no yichus anymore to the father. So if there's no b'chlali by a goyim, we learned this before, there's no yichus to the father. And Yavamas are correct, and we had a few times. So if you're going to tell me that there's only knas when there's a father, so then it's obvious that there's no knas for gedim. So the very fact that we need a separate pasuk to teach me that by gedim there's no knas means that by a Yisrael, even without a father, there is knas. Amar Ishlakish, another halacha. Ishlakish says, a Maitzi Shemra la katana. Person that's Maitzi Shemra on his wife, which is a katana. And it turns out to be a lie. Potter is potter to pay the knas. Shenema, because the pasuk says, "V'nosnu la via naira." You have to pay this knas to the father of the naira. And naira mali dibra kasav. Here, the Torah writes the word naira spelled out fully with the hey at the end of the word, so it has to be an actual naira. As we had before, by Einis and Mafata, the Torah writes naira without the hey at the end. So that could include maybe even a katana. But here, naira means she's actually a naira, but not a katana. Maskefla Ravacha Barabba asks on this. Taime the chsiv ba naira. Only reason you say that this is only a naira, excluding a katana, is because the Torah writes full the word naira with the hey. Holavachi, but otherwise havamina fil katana. You would say that this parsha of Maitzi Shemra refers even to a katana. But aksiv, in the continuation of the parsha, it says, if it's true that she actually is not a basula because she had a relation with someone after the Edison, then you have to bring her out to the entrance of her father's home with skalua, and you have to give a skila. So that's a continuation. Now, katana lav basayin shini. Obviously, by a katana, she does not get such a kind of a punishment. So we know that this is speaking about a naira. Why do you need to say that? How do I know it's speaking about a naira? Because it says naira male. You see over there from the einish, from the continuation of the pasuk. Okay, this is not so pashut. Taisus over here has all discussion about this. We had this piece of Gemara before already. Even though later it's talking about an einish for a naira, doesn't necessarily mean that the whole parsha has to be speaking about a naira. Okay, Taisus explains a deeper pshat in the Gemara here. Let's continue. Ella, the Gemara says, Elakan naira. What he's saying is, because of here the Torah writes naira fully spelled with the hey, so here it's a naira. Hakamokim shenema nar, when the Torah writes naira spelled as nar, So that's a fila katana b'mashma. That includes even a katana. So therefore, when it comes to an oinus and mefate, where the Torah does not spell out the word naira with the hey in the end, it just writes nar, over there the payment for the oinus and mefate will be even for a katana. And that's, if you remember, the opinion of the Rabbanan that say that the punishment, that the oinish, the knas that is of oinus and mefate includes even a katana. Okay.